Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful to be with all of you, and I am in the Rosicrucian Research Library today at Rosicrucian Park. This magnificent collection of rare books and manuscripts was created by, the beginning was created by the personal collection of H. Spencer Lewis at the beginning of the 1900s. And he donated his entire collection to the Rosicrucian order. And his son, Ralph Lewis, who was the secretary of the Supreme Grand Lodge, the executive secretary of the Supreme Grand Lodge at that time, had a vision to create a library like this. So Ralph Lewis and his brother Earl Lewis, who was an architect, together they designed the Rosicrucian Research Library. The most important artifacts, text in the Rosicrucian Research Library are the Rosicrucian manifestos from 1614, 1615, and 1616. This is the first one, the Fama Fraternitatis, and this was a call to the learned people and the leaders of Europe to transform Europe at that time. And it was, Europe was very superstitious and intolerant, and this was a call for transformation of society. And then the next Rosicrucian manifesto is the Confessio Fraternitatis. This was published the next year, and it continues to focus on the transformation of society. And then the third Rosicrucian manifesto is the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. And these three Rosicrucian manifestos are bound together in one volume. The Chemical Wedding explores the inner transformation of the soul. And it's, although it talks about a wedding and includes an invitation to a wedding, it's really about the death of who we believe we are, so that we can go on a journey of deep personal transformation. The Rosicrucian Research Library also has our modern Rosicrucian manifestos. This includes the Positio Fraternitatis, which was published in 2001. And this is a position statement on the state of the world. So if we could have the next slide, please. And then in 2014, the Appellatio Fraternitatis Rosicrucis was published, and this is an appeal to everyone, not just the leaders and the most learned people, but to all mystics, to come together for protecting the environment, to have more humanism in the world and more spirituality. And then in 2016, the late Rosicrucian Manifesto was published 400 years after the first chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. This is the new chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. And it tells the story of a dream, an alchemical dream that leads us toward a vision of a better world. All right, next, please. This is H. Spencer Lewis's personal copy of the Rosicrucian Manual from 1927. You can see his book plate over there to the left. And next we have the secret symbols of the Rosicrucians. This was also H. Spencer Lewis's personal copy. And this is a mandala coloring book for Rosicrucians. H. Spencer Lewis published this so that Rosicrucian members could color this as a form of meditation. And next in the Rosicrucian Research Library, we have the precursors of the monographs that we study today. Also in the Rosicrucian Research Library, we have important text related to the traditional Martinist order. This is a first edition book of Errors and of Truth, written by Louis Claude de Saint-Martin, who's important in the traditional Martinist order. This was originally written in 1774, and then this was published in 1775. And the Grand Heptad in San Jose recently translated this into English. So for those of you who are Martinists, you can go to Martinist, and that's plural with an S at the end, martinists.org, to be able to read of Errors and Truth in English. And we also recently translated one of Saint Martin's teachers was Martinist de Pasquale, and he wrote Treatise on the Reintegration of Beings, and we recently translated that into English as well, and that's also available on martinists.org. Next, we'll see a book in the archives by Dr. Gerard Ancaus, and he's better known as Papus. This is The Science of Numbers, and he was, Papus was responsible for organizing the initiates in the lineage of Louis Claude de Saint-Martin into what today is the Martinist order. Now, the oldest text that is in the research library is an ancient Egyptian linen from the year 325 BCE. And your museum, the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum, actually has much older text on linen and on papyrus, but those are all in the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum next door. This is the oldest text that we have in the research library, and it's an excerpt from the Book of the Coming Forth by Day, which is more commonly known as the Book of the Dead. The next text that we have is from 1570, and it is on the Egyptian mysteries by Iamblichus. And this comes much later. Iamblichus lived in I believe it was the 3rd century of our era, and this was published in the 1500s. Next, we have a book called Archadoxa, and it's the work of Paracelsus, who lived in the 1500s. And this book disclosed ways of making quintessences and elixirs and the secret formulas that he used in his method of healing people. The next book is Aurora by Jakob Böhme. I mentioned that Louis Claude de Saint-Martin, on whose work the Martinist order is based, he had 2 teachers. He had Martinist de Pasquale, whom he knew personally and was a student of, and he called Jakob Böhme his second teacher. He never met Jakob Böhme. He was born 115 years after Jakob Böhme had passed on. But Saint-Martin was deeply influenced by the work of Jakob Böhme, and we have many of his works in our collection. In this work, he discusses how knowledge about the divine is no substitute for experiencing the divine, which he refers to as the signature. And another book that we have in the collection is the Signatura Rerum, or the signature of all things. Another book that we have in the collection, here's the Signatura Rerum by Jakob Böhme. And next we have a book by Robert Flood, and this is The History of the Macrocosm. Robert Flood was a physician in England. He lived in the late 1500s and early 1600s. And he practiced Paracelsian medicine. I just mentioned Paracelsus before, who worked with natural elements to help people heal themselves. Robert Fludd was also an astrologer and a mathematician, a Kabbalist, a cosmologist, and a Rosicrucian. He made most of this publication, by publicly seeking his admission into the Rosicrucian fraternity. He asked, "Can I be a member?" And in his books, Robert Fludd devoted himself to presenting the harmony between the macrocosm, the world, and the microcosm, the human being. Next, we have books by Michael Meyer, who lived from 1568 to 1622. He was a friend and colleague of Robert Fludd, who I just mentioned. Michael Meyer was a German scientist. He was the personal physician to the Emperor Rudolph II. He was a defender of the Rosicrucians. And his book, A Chemical Examination of the More Secret of the Secrets of Nature, was one of 9 books by Michael Meyer that were found in the personal library of Isaac Newton after his death. And Isaac Newton had written many notes and commentaries in the books by Michael Meyer. Another book by Michael Meyer is Viatorium. And this is an alchemical allegory, and it takes us on a journey. Next, we have books by Francis Bacon. The Natural History in 10 Centuries, and he tells the story. The natural history is about a forest of forests. And Francis Bacon shares scientific experiments, his personal observations, ancient teachings, and analytical discussions. We also have, a number of books by Francis Bacon, including The Natural and Experimental History of Winds, the Bacona's Opera, and many others. This is a book by Isaac Newton, and at the time of his death, Isaac Newton's personal library contained around 1,800 volumes. It was this massive library that he kept secret because it wasn't safe for him to make his mystical practice well known. Out of those 1,800 volumes, 169 of them were on alchemy. And this was, again, the most important alchemical library in the world at that time. And included in this collection was a copy of the Fame and Confession of the Fraternity of the Rose Cross by Thomas Vaughan. And this is the English translation of the Rosicrucian manifestos. So we'll stay on this image now. This is from the private collection of H. Spencer Lewis, and it's Sibley's Astrology. H. Spencer Lewis was he was avidly interested in astrology. Later in his life, he moved the focus to Amark and other mystical studies, but earlier in his life, he was extremely involved in astrology. And he referenced these 2 volumes of Sibley's Astrology. These were really important books in his collection. Okay, we're continuing to move forward in time, and this image is from an oversized volume that includes images drawn and painted by David Roberts. Roberts was the first professional artist to visit the Near East without a patron or a connection to a military expedition or a missionary group. He went on his own, and he sailed to Alexandria in 1838, and for 11 months traveled up the Nile River. And he went across deserts and mountains, and he created these amazing images. In many cases, the temples that he entered and that he drew were filled with sand. You would see people on maybe 20 or 30 feet of sand. So it was a really valuable collection showing the state of the different temples at that time. So Roberts recorded his impressions. He made 272 watercolors and made a total of 247 lithographs that were published between 1842 and 1849. And these are in a number of volumes, and the Rosicrucian Research Library has the entire set. We have just one volume on display in the research library. The next book that we're going to look at is 1,000 Miles Up the Nile. That was written by Amelia B. Edwards, and she's the co-founder of the Egypt Exploration Society. She started working as a writer to help earn money for her elderly parents. And eventually she became very, very popular. And in 1873 to 1874, she and a friend of hers decided that they would rent a boat and sail up and down the Nile. And it resulted in this book. And after that, after she saw that there was a lot of physical destruction of the ancient sites, and she witnessed a number of thefts, she worked with the British Museum to set up the Egypt Exploration Fund in 1882 in order to protect the antiquities in Egypt. And just imagine a young woman who, she's born in London, she becomes a journalist so she can take care of her parents, and she ends up exploring many parts of the world and eventually dedicating herself to protecting the ancient temples in Egypt. Les Sciences Maudites was edited under the direction of Jolivet Castillo, the very famous alchemist and mystic. This was published in 1900, and it includes text by the most important mystics of the day, including Pappus. And these are essays covering alchemy, Kabbalah, and esotericism. And that is, that's a Jolivet Castillo in his alchemical laboratory. On the left, we have the book. This one is from 1750. This is called The Economy of Life. And economy in this context means the proper running of a household or an organization, or in this case, the proper running of someone's life. So it's a guidebook for how to manage your life. And the work was used in a Tibetan monastery from at least the year 732, but it probably dates from much earlier than that. And it was translated into English in 1740 through 1750. And this, then it became the book published by the Rosicrucian order called Unto Thee I Grant, which you see on the right here. There are a number of important writers from more modern history that were Rosicrucians, and we have some of their works in the rare books room. Ella Wheeler Wilcox was a member of the Supreme Council of Amorc at its very beginnings, and she helped to establish the Rosicrucian order in America. She was very well known as a poet, and you may have heard the saying, laugh and the world laughs with you, weep and you weep alone. And she wrote a lot of beautiful poetry and other works on how our thoughts direct where we are in life, and how focusing on what we want, focusing on the positive, can move our lives in that direction. Another well-known, and this is an image of Ella Wheeler Wilcox. It was her favorite image of herself with her cat, and she was very well known in her time. So next, we have a book by Marie Corelli, and Marie Corelli was a British writer and an early feminist. She was probably the most popular novelist of her time. Winston Churchill collected her works, and she was Queen Victoria's favorite writer. Marie Corelli's father and grandfather had been prominent members of the order in Italy, and when she learned of the Rosicrucian order in America, she became a member. And so we have a number of her works, and I like one thing that she wrote that says, unhappiness simply means life being put to the wrong uses. And the next image shows that we have a limited edition book signed by Marie Corelli. This is a photograph of Elbert Hubbard. He lived from 1856 to 1915. And he and his wife, Alice, were very progressive philosophers and leaders of the Roycroft Arts and Crafts movement of East Aurora, New York. And Frater Hugh McCaig presented a fascinating teleconference on the life and work of Elbert Hubbard and the Roycroft Arts and Craft movement that began in 1895. Elbert Hubbard wrote many books. He was a publisher and an artist. He and H. Spencer Lewis were close personal friends. And Elbert Hubbard served on the first Supreme Council of Amorc. In 1915, he wrote to H. Spencer Lewis promising further support when he returned from a lecture tour of Europe, which unfortunately was, his transportation was on the Lusitania, and that ship was torpedoed, and Alice and Elbert Hubbard died during the sinking of the Lusitania. So we have a number of his books. We can see an image of the next one there, the notebook of Elbert Hubbard. Next, we have a work by Nicholas Roerich, and this is called the Roerich Himalaya, a monograph. And it's a volume that celebrates the achievements of Nicholas Roerich, who was a Russian visionary and an artist, and he traveled extensively throughout Central Asia. He was the Rosicrucian order's personal representative in the Far East. And Nicholas Roerich created the Roerich Peace Pact. And this was supported by President Franklin Roosevelt, who wrote to the Secretary of State in 1933. Here's what Franklin Roosevelt wrote. As you know, I am very keen about the Roerich Peace Pact, and I hope we can get it going via the Americas. Will you and Henry Wallace talk this over and have something for me when I get back? This is an impact the accepted a pact that protects works of art during times of war. And Nicholas Roerich was a great influence in the introduction of the Great Seal of the United States on the dollar bill. And we'll just look at a little bit. The next slide shows some images. That's Nicholas Roerich in the center. You may be familiar with the image on the left, which was on the cover of the last issue of the Rosicrucian Digest. On the right is his symbol for the Roerich Peace Pact, the three circles together, and above is a painting of one of his many paintings of the Himalayas. We have books by other Rosicrucian authors. Of course, we have books by H. Spencer Lewis, and he was the co-founder of the Rosicrucian Amwork. He wrote more than 24 books and booklets, many magazines, many articles for magazines. He also published the magazines. He wrote the first monographs based on ancient manuscripts that he had been allowed to view during his initiation into the Rosicrucian tradition in Toulouse, France in 1909. And here's a quotation from H. Spencer Lewis. "There's nothing so inspiring, so filled with peace, happiness, perfect health, joy, and contentment as the development of the spiritual nature." And these are just a few of the books written by H. Spencer Lewis. Next, we have Ralph Lewis. And Ralph Lewis served as the imperator of the Rosicrucian order from 1939 to 1987. He also wrote under his mystical name, which was Tsar Validavar. And he was an author, a photographer, and a humanitarian. Ralph Lewis wrote, "Try to live life so that some part of each day will satisfy a healthy and natural desire. Ideally, contentment should be cumulative daily, not a sudden prize at the end of life." And these are a few of the books that Ralph Lewis wrote, including Cosmic Mission Fulfilled, which is the biography of his father, H. Spencer Lewis. We have the books of Christian Bernard in the research library, signed copies by him. As most of us know, Christian Bernard served as the imperator of the Rosicrucian order from 1990 to 2019. He just recently retired. And he wrote, "Let us learn to let go, to not allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by the circumstances and conditions of this world. Let us constantly remember that at the heart of ourselves, as at the heart of all human beings, there forever stands a silent and watchful guardian, the master within." And these are two of the three books that Christian Bernard has written. He recently published, the order recently published a third book in French, and it has not been translated into English yet. We also have the works of Frater Lonnie Edwards, MD, in the research library. And as many of you know, our dear Frater Lonnie serves as the vice president of the English Grand Lodge for the Americas. And he's the author of the popular book and DVD series and many videos based on spiritual laws that govern humanity and the universe. And here's a quotation by Frater Lonnie that I really like. "Our thoughts are contagious and they create and manifest their own kind. to create an environment of mutual respect, right relations, happiness, and harmony, we should have the intention in our hearts that all human beings have the right to advance in life, and that they have the right to think and live the way they choose, as long as they do not interfere with the rights, privileges, and dignity of others. And I spoke with Frater Lani last week. He's doing very well. And we'll be setting up another live Wednesday teleconference with him at some point in the near future. And there's his books. Now here in the Rosicrucian Research Library, we have a case with some artifacts from the history of the Rosicrucian order. When H. Spencer Lewis went to France he was seeking the Rosicrucians, and while he was there, they asked him if he would reestablish the Rosicrucian order in America. And he agreed to do that. And they told him that he would meet others who would give him certain documents and other items that would complete the work. So he came back to the United States, and a woman named May Banks Stacy met with him and told him that she had met Rosicrucians in India and in Egypt. And when she was in Egypt, they gave her some documents and this cross, and told her that she would meet someone, and at that time she should give him those documents and this Rosicrucian jewel. And that completed what H. Spencer Lewis needed in order to establish the Rosicrucian order Amorc. This is H. Spencer Lewis's stole that he wore as the Imperator of Amorc. This is the book plate that he used in the books that were part of his personal collection. This is a little statue of, it's a figure of Padre Folio. H. Spencer Lewis described that the Rosicrucians first came to the United States in the 1600s as part of the Vizcaíno expedition from Europe to California. And there was a Carmelite priest who was on that expedition named Padre Folio. And later someone gave him this small image. It's maybe 6 inches high of Padre Folio. And we have that in this artifact case. And the apron that you see here, this was H. Spencer Lewis's personal apron. And for those of you who have participated in a Rosicrucian funeral ceremony, you know that part of the ceremony is that the rose that's usually on the Rosicrucian apron is removed from the apron. And so as part of that ceremony, the rose was removed, and this was H. Spencer Lewis's apron. So that concludes this part of our tour of the Rosicrucian Research Library. I'm going to tempt fate and see if we can go into the rare books room just to show you some of the original books there.
Here is the oldest text in the research library. This is an excerpt from the chapters of Coming Forth by Day, which is typically called the Book of the Dead, and this is written on linen. Here is David Roberts' book of lithographs from Egypt and Nubia. This is 1,000 Miles Up the Nile by Amelia B. Edwards. This is the book by Iamblichus from 1570 on the Egyptian mysteries. Here are two books by Jakob Böhme, signature Rerum and Aurora. Now, here's the gem of the research library, the 3 Rosicrucian manifestos, bound into one volume. Here is Robert Flood's book, De Natura Simia Sua Technica. Here are two books by Michael Meyer, Secretioris Naturae Secretorum and Viatorium. Here are two books by Francis Bacon, A Natural History, and this tiny volume, History of Life and Death. This book is by Isaac Newton, Optics, or a treatise on the reflections, refractions, inflections, and colors. And this book is from the personal library of H. Spencer Lewis, Sibley's Astrology from 1788. You can see his bookplate over on the left. The research library has the entire collection of Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin's books, first edition books written in French. This one is Of Errors and of Truth. And here is The Science of Numbers by Papus, Dr. Gerard Ancos, the founder of the modern traditional Martinist order. This is Nicholas Roerich's book, Himalaya, a monograph with his beautiful paintings. Here is a limited edition and personally signed copy of Marie Corelli's novel, The Devil's Motor. This is a notebook of Elbert Hubbard. Poems of Hope and Poems of Cheer by Ella Wheeler Wilcox. Here we have Unto Thee I Grant, published by the Rosicrucian Order in 1938, and this is based on the much older Economy of Human Life. This edition is from 1750, but it goes back even further than that. Here is the booklet Chromat, which was the precursor to what became the Rosicrucian monographs. This large volume is The Secret Symbols of the Rosicrucians. H. Spencer Lewis had this reprinted in black and white so that members could color the secret symbols, the mandalas, from the 16th and 17th centuries. And this is his personal copy with his signature, and he colored the mandalas on the inside. Here is H. Spencer Lewis's personal copy of the Rosicrucian Manual. This edition is from 1927. In 2009, on the 100th anniversary of the moment when H. Spencer Lewis was initiated into the Rosicrucian tradition in France, We published this book, Master of the Rose Cross, a collection of essays by and about H. Spencer Lewis. And this particular copy includes the signatures of the Imperator and all the Grand Masters during a meeting that was held in Toulouse, where H. Spencer Lewis's initiation had taken place. This was held 100 years later.